All right, Sahil, I thought a great place to start this conversation is you were an engineer at Doge at the Veterans office, and you're working for $0. You were not getting paid to go do this. You're a very talented software engineer. You've got the world at your feet. You could go do all kinds of different things. But you decided to go work at Doge in the government. Then you got fired. You got booted out of there. What do you think Doge has been successful at? And what do you think Doge has struggled with in terms of actually making progress?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tall order. Whatever you define Doge's goals as, they were all pretty ambitious. I think in terms of success, almost definitely just getting in the room. I think I've talked to a lot of people in software and tech who've tried to, make an impact. USDS started under Obama in 2014. Like this has been like an ongoing effort to modernize, make the government more efficient. Not all of these ideas are new. But what's been different about this time is that the technical people, the people with actual sort of domain expertise on shipping software, high quality software, were in the room, right? And so I think Trump's EOs, for example, the EO that sort of rebranded the USDS as Doge, the EO to cut contracts, to the cost efficiency initiative, even the workforce optimization initiative. Though over time I learned that was like a much harder of a battle to fight. I think that's kind of how I split it up. There's like the sort of like the half that's focused on like cutting contracts and actually making the federal government more competent in theory, because how else do you cut contracts without having the federal government take over these roles? I would say on that side of things, Doge is incredibly successful and will continue to be over the next year, 2 years. And honestly, hopefully this continues for decades. It's not like a one and done sort of situation. I think the stuff that Doge has really struggled with has been the sort of workforce optimization, the RIF, the Reduction in Force Act, these sorts of things. It's not, and it's not unsuccessful in the sense that like they failed to do something. It's just like the bounds of how to actually make that happen are so, and you may say for good reason, right? You don't want a new administration coming in and just like firing everyone they don't like. So there are a lot of rules around who you can let go, how deterministic those things are. For example, the longer you've served, the more protected you are. By definition, your performance ratings are actually at the very bottom of the list. They almost don't matter at all. And coming in as a sort of a private citizen, having done and experienced layoffs in the past, that's surprising. If you're like, wait a second, you can't like just like let go like the bottom 5% of all the low performers, based on some objective metrics. You kind of have to like basically start at like ironically start at the probationary employees who are like the most recently promoted, right? Like the most recently like upgraded, like some skill-based measure. And it's just been interesting. I think the biggest thing is we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. And maybe the biggest critique is like, why would you need to go join the government to learn stuff? Like, why not just read a book? But I think there are a lot of things you can't really learn, like how to play soccer without playing soccer, right? Like there's a level of like, the job that's so complex and not really sort of vocalized or verbalized or written down in any form. Like, how do you work in the VA making change with all of these different constituents? The VA is 473,000 employees, and it's one agency within the federal government, and it's bound by congressional laws and rules and IFRs and court decisions, and shipping a piece of software in that framework is much more complicated. So I think that's kind of like the high level of like Doge. I mean, it's interesting because some people may say, oh, Doge did not failed to quote unquote save $1 trillion a year. But on the other hand, it's a relatively small team, almost like a campaign field office that has probably saved the federal government like on the order of dozens of billions of dollars a year. And that's almost like a $1 billion a person. I mean, that's like still like in 6 months to save $1 billion a person, you look at the S&P 500, that's like a multi-$100 billion company of value, right? That was saved. It's not on zero. And that's why I did it. I felt like I basically looked at the value I was having as a private citizen, which is, not insignificant, but like, on the order of like, millions of dollars a year in value or something like that. The top sort of engineers do that well. Maybe they're creating tens of millions of dollars of value. And then joining the government, and all of a sudden I can like ship an app that makes like the average VA employee like 0.1% more productive, but there's 473,000 of them, and the impact they have is 9 million veterans that they serve every year. It's kind of hard to deny like that, the average software engineer working there would have a much more profound impact there than like working at some random Series B funded startup, like using AI to like help you, do XYZ thing, right? Just like statistically, like there's like a clear value. And that's, it's kind of it's like an inefficient market in a sense. Like the government doesn't pay well enough. It's kind of a pain in the butt to work for the government. You get like an HP laptop, you have to like log in with like a PIV card. You can't work from home easily. Your boss changes every 4 years, right? There are all these reasons not to do it, which is unfortunate.
So let's take the VA as an example. If the VA was not a public kind of organization or division of the government, instead it was private, and DOGE showed up, it feels like DOGE would do a whole bunch of things to right size both the size of the organization, the efficiency, the service that it's provided, maybe even the capital that's needed to actually go do this stuff. Right? There's all these kind of changes that as a private business probably would be done and could be done by, switching out the management team, and that new management team comes in and starts making all these changes. It sounds like what you're saying is there was a bunch of things that you guys wanted to do, but were not allowed to do because of this kind of bureaucratic set of rules. And so if we then extrapolate that out to every single organization that DOGE goes into, it's like, okay, well, there is $1 trillion or more of waste, or there are, hundreds of thousands of jobs that are unnecessary. It's just that your kind of hands are tied behind your back and they're like, well, make change, but don't make change in these 10 different ways that actually would be profound, kind of impact.
Yes, exactly. There's this like funny webcomic where this wife asks her husband to like fix a car, and she comes back 2 hours later, and the husband is like watching like some YouTube video on like World War II, and she's like, "What are you doing? I asked you to fix the car," and he basically had to explain, well, like I couldn't fix the car until I had to fix this other thing that was broken. That like I needed to go buy this part, but this like there's like all of these steps to actually do any one thing. And in the there's like in a private business, you could kind of just like short circuit your way to like doing the actual thing. There would be some level of like sort of move fast and break things, right? Like something may break. Like last week, DMs on Twitter were broken for 24 hours or something like that. Like that can happen. That generally doesn't happen at the federal government, because there's just like so many levels of resiliency built in that are, you would argue quite wasteful. But yes, if the VA was private, you would be able to move a lot faster. The risk being that like that speed would potentially result in like veterans not getting the right healthcare, or getting an AI answer that hallucinated and told a veteran something that led to them, committing suicide, or like they're like that's kind of how the government operates. It's like it's not necessarily unwilling to make change. It's just like they're so concerned about they don't think about opportunity costs, right? They don't think about like, oh, like the current existing system is so bad that veterans are currently not getting good care, and in this in this other state they would be getting much better care. They sort of think about like, well, if we make a change and something bad happens, we're at fault, right? And so there's just like a lot of risk aversion. The other thing is that technology shifts; it moves faster and faster and faster and faster, right? And so like the VA, I think, started digitizing, right? So like just moving from paper to like a web form. I think something in like 2012. Or 2014 or something like that, right? And so imagine like how long it takes to just like the rules that we're following are like, every hospital, for example, like supports faxes, right? So you have to have like this entire ecosystem of supporting faxes. My opinion would be that like COVID showed that everyone was able to function in society with a smartphone, either an Apple device or a Google device. And like Apple and Google and the VA should hang out and figure out like, how do we make every veteran get this va.gov app on their phone, and allow them to, submit benefits, schedule appointments, do all the things they need to do, which exists, by the way. This app already exists, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of veterans already use it. But to get to 100%, which is kind of like the bar for like getting anything done, is this like better in every way than faxes? And you may say, well, there's one veteran who like lives in like, like doesn't have internet and like super rural, and like, like there's always exceptions to basically just like not actually moving the thing forward. So yeah, I think the other thing, by the way, is like just hiring people. Like I think there's so much focus on like the reduction in force, but there's also like you need to build competency over time, right? And if you've built a workforce that was good at COBOL, right, and you now need a workforce that's good at JavaScript, right, to like ship the next generation of apps and user experiences, like you're going to have to hire people, and those people are going to be young. Their resumes are not going, like, if you just objectively look at like a resume of like someone who's been coding for 30 years and someone who's been coding for 5 years, you say, well, we should hire the person who's been coding for 30 years. But actually, in this case, you should be hiring the person who's been coding for 5 years, because the person who's been coding for 5 years is like, is just as good at the modern languages, if not better. And this person, hasn't really learned anything new for a long time, right? And so I think there are a lot of these sorts of, like, even the job codes that for example, I learned that if you want to apply as a software engineer, the job code is IT specialist. So that's like the job code, right? Like the VA, for example, has like 7,000, I think, IT specialists. That's the job code. But what does that define? That includes PMs, what we would consider, in the tech industry, PMs, product designers, web designers, UI designers, accessibility people, AI ethicists, like literally anyone that touches, like, has any understanding of like computers, right? Has a degree at all, any shape or form related to computers, and not even that, like public health. A lot of people are like, it's just such a broad job code. So imagine you put up a job listing for an IT specialist, you have a software engineer apply, and you have like someone who was working on like, drone missiles in Iraq or something like that. Like, the VA would probably hire the other person, right? And that just makes it very difficult to be like, oh crap, we don't actually have the technical resources to like do what we need to do. And so we're going to like give IBM or Booz Allen Hamilton or Accenture or Deloitte like a massive contract in order to do it. And then they don't really have they're that sort of like, imagine like the decentralization of the product management, where you're like doing the PMing over here. Like Congress is like the PM in a sense. Like they've defined the overall spec, right? And then that has to be transformed by the employees, the career employees of like, okay, how do we actually do this? And then they have to go write a contract. And then what if they learn like 6 months into building this thing, and IBM says, oh, actually, this is a different way of doing things. By the way, like the average engineer at IBM is probably not that good, to be honest. And so you end up with like not great software that technically does what you're supposed to do, but like has not gone through any agile or like, any sort of iterative cycle. Like one of the first things I did when I got to the VA was teach people about V0 and like show people like what you can prototype. And people were like, wait, this is awesome. I'm like, yeah, honestly, like every time we like go to a contractor, we should give them we should just give them like the front end of like, with demo data and stuff, like this is what we want. We've already built the shell of what we need. This is the buttons. This is, like everything is built. It's not that hard nowadays to, in 2 hours, you could build like I built like the first day I built like a veterans disability wizard that was better than like the current system, because the current system is like you type in 40 and you type in 10 and it gives you 40. Like that's like the calculator on va.gov right now. And I was like, you can do something really cool. You could have a wizard. Like all I did was I took AI, I took in all of the rules around disability claims, like, just a bunch of laws, right, that define this stuff. And just fed it into O1 Pro and said, like what would the spec look like, the product spec look like for like a wizard that would help you run through this with a web UI. And then I like edited that down, and then I pasted that into V0, and I got like a really nice prototype that I showed the secretary, I showed other people. Everyone's like, this is awesome. But it's also like, good luck shipping it, like no one would disagree that this is better than the system that we have, but good luck getting it all the way through the checks and balances. Like there's just such a kind of like a, some people call it learned helplessness, defeatism. Like people who've been doing it, frankly, they have more experience doing this than I do, right? They see me as like the young, naive kid coming in thinking they can change the world. And then they're like, dude, good luck. Like you're going to, like in 2 seconds, you're going to get called up to Congress and you're going to have to like answer questions for 4 hours on like why we hallucinated something, or, like some veteran's going to sue because they like, they're using IE4 and they can't use the thing, like that's like there's just such a tendency to like think about, and it's easy to just like do nothing, it's just easy to be like, well, nothing's ever going to ship. It's it's kind of like if you worked at Google, right? Like there's like this idea that your work doesn't, it's just so far, you're so small and such a big thing and things take so long. Like what's the point? You'll just sit in your meetings and you'll just kind of like, do the rigmarole, but not actually be so invested in like the outcome. And it takes a crisis in a way, right? Like even Google, you could argue like is now moving much faster, but it took a crisis in the sense of OpenAI and AI generally to kind of get them to move, right? Like what I think Satya said, like, we want to make Google dance, right? Like, and you just have to think like, what's going to make the VA dance, right? Like what crisis has to get so crazy, so large, that like things have to completely just break in order for them to be like, okay, fine, we should hire like 10 software engineers, and that would move the needle. I really think that would move the needle. Like if every agency hired like 10 software engineers. But then it's like, okay, we have to hire them. We have to like do the job code changes. We have to like pay them well enough to recruit the right talent. We have to give them a true leverage. They can't just get bottlenecked within this organization. Like when I talk to former USDS people, they're like, wow, you got in the room with like you met the secretary, like as a software, like there's like that. And that I think like credit to Trump and the new admin that they're like taking technology much more seriously than like other admins have in the past. Like I don't think Biden was super interested in like, having a bunch of software engineers around, but I really believe in Mark Andreessen software is eating the world, and that's just like the era we're in, right? Like we're moving from like I think an era of like every politician is like lawyer adjacent to like every politician will be software engineer adjacent. Like that is like code is kind of like the new law, in my opinion.
When you evaluate Doge's successfulness, I think that there is a feeling online that there's a little bit of a waving of the white flag right now, right? You've got Elon saying, look, I did my best. We ran in there. I think Doge will continue to try to do its best. I'm going back to my companies because I need to go focus on that stuff. You see the bills that are getting put forward. It went from like 1 to 2 trillion to then it was like 175 to 200 billion to now it seems like it's like 9 or 10 billion. A lot of my friends who went to go work at Doge, they're either already out the door or they feel like, one foot's out the door and they're kind of looking for their next thing. How do you evaluate the success of Doge? And then also, how do you look at these two personalities that built an alliance between Trump and Elon that really, I think, kind of reinvigorated a whole bunch of the technology industry being interested in politics? But now it feels like they're not breaking up, but they're definitely kind of going back to each of their domains and going to go play king for a day. Elon in the tech world, and then Trump obviously is going to continue to be the president on the government side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like that old phrase, like, shoot for the moon and you may end up in the stars, right? I think Elon has a tendency to sort of like, aim for like the most ambitious target, right? Full self-driving, go to Mars, internet for every person, like, and he's had success in the past doing that, right? And so I think like if he had aimed for 8 billion, we wouldn't have 8 billion, we'd have like 200 million or something, right? So like, I think there is like just this idea of like, I think he looked at it from, frankly, probably from first principles, where he was like, he just probably was like, what is the job to be done by the US government? How much money would that take? With zero technical debt, and came up with this number of 1 to 2 trillion. And it's just, yeah, I think he would, he was humbled. I think we were all humbled by it, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that too, by the way, right? We live in a democracy. I'm not advocating for fascism. I'm just advocating for like more software development in the federal government. And so I think that, yeah, but I do think like generally like the sort of, like it's kind of like the average startup like doesn't work, right? Like the average startup that raises like $100 million like doesn't actually succeed at becoming a unicorn. Like, it just generally the odds of success are relatively low. And I think everyone knew that going into it, that this was like, they weren't doing, or, like, Obama or Trump in the early days, right? Like, you join like an upstart candidate, you're excited to get in on the ground floor. And if this works, it becomes this really cool thing, and you get to tell your grandkids you were part of this thing. And if it doesn't work, you still tell your grandkids you were part of this thing, but it doesn't necessarily manifest into the large thing. In this case, I really feel strongly after being there that like the USDS Doge thing will continue for a long period of time, because there's no stopping like the modernization of government. It will be slow, right? And it'll be a lot more expensive to get done than it should in theory. But it will 100% happen, right? Like, people are getting MacBooks and people are getting AI, and like these things are happening. And so I think that is sort of like an inevitability. It's just a question. And even to your point about like Trump and Musk, I think also like JD Vance, like the fact that we had someone under the age of 70, in the White House, got young people, like young meaning, like under the age of 50, right? Like excited about like, oh wow, things are, people, we have someone who wrote a great book who's like, like interesting, smart, accomplished people in the government. I hope the Democrats have like a similar sort of reaction and answer. Who knows if they will. But I don't know. I think like this is just like the nature of the beast, where you get really excited. You think you can change everything. You do notch a couple of wins, and then things normalize. And then there's a midterm, and I think America is like just like incredibly resilient to any form of, like, you could call it the deep state, you could call it democracy, you can call it whatever you want, but America is truly deeply resilient to like personalities coming in and having like an independent impact, like an individualized impact. Like the only way to get things done is as a large group, like a big coalition. At the end of the day, Congress is responsible. Congress is incredibly decentralized. You have to convince 300 different Congress people, all of which represent like a completely different group of Americans. That's hard, right? Like how many things, like no tax on tips, I guess, was 100 to 0, right? So it happens. But guess what? That's not going to reduce the deficit.
The theory that you have around the first term, people were protesting outside of Trump Tower. The second term, they're protesting outside of Tesla, sales sites, seems very interesting to me. Explain this.
Yes. So I think maybe me more than most of my friends, frankly, give Trump a lot of credit. I think Trump is very smart. He's kind of a political genius. And I just noticed that, like, I think, Doge kind of played this role as a scapegoat, right? The traditional political scapegoat where, yeah, if you think about the first term, people were protesting Trump. People, in New York City were protesting outside of Trump Towers. The second term, people weren't doing that, right? People were protesting outside of Tesla car dealership. So I think it's very interesting that I think Trump basically got Elon and got Doge and got this amazing big target out there. And all of these sort of like super unpopular, decisions that were made, whether it's around US aid or some science funding or like this Harvard stuff, like it was just kind of easy. And you could kind of see even like the reporters, like the headline would say Doge, but then there'd be nothing about Doge like in the piece, right? It's just like, oh, Doge did this, Doge did that, Doge did this. And I'm like, well, I'm here and I kind of don't see us doing any of those sorts of things, right? Like we like may help you like, parse some Excel file with a pivot table to like give you the data you need to do this thing. But by the way, like, Trump appointed these agency heads. These agency heads are the ones who are responsible for these actions. I find it, yeah, very, very interesting that I think Elon was relatively good, had faith in being given power to like make these sorts of changes. And the trade was, like you're going to get the flack for some of these things. And I think Trump sort of wins on that one, right? Like I think Trump got a lot of value. He won an election. So like for sure, he got a lot of value out of like, Elon, this incredibly smart, successful person supporting him when very few people would. And then, like I think Doge was able to absorb a lot of the impact. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now when Elon is now parting ways, officially as a special government employee, like what that does to the narrative, right? And like what that does to but I think it's just too, it's the kind of thing. Like it's just too popular to hate, Elon is this like crazy evil person. Like he's very willing to say what he believes, right? And that's going to turn a lot of people off. And I think Trump is very good at not saying what he believes. Like I think there were a lot of things I sort of noticed where I was like, we should be getting this done based on like what has been said. Like we should be able to do this, and then learning like, oh, actually, like maybe like they don't actually want us to be able to do it. They want us to believe that we can do it. So we spend a bunch of effort and time. But eventually, like the RIF doesn't work, or like the RIF doesn't actually even happen, right? Like the VA we've made, well, I don't think we've done a RIF at all so far, and it's just, and so I think that is which by the way is maybe fine. Maybe one of the 400 agencies shouldn't do one, and one should be 100%, and everything should like land in the middle. That would be like a sophisticated sort of scalpel approach, as Trump said, to doing this. But really what a scalpel mean, I think that's kind of interesting. I think the stars have to align for a decision to happen. Trump has to agree with it. Elon has to agree with it, and other things have to happen. But at the end of the day, like who did Americans vote for, right? Americans did not vote for Elon. They voted for Trump, and Trump is the one that has the power, right? He's and they voted for Congress, and Congress has power, and they voted for the courts, and the courts have a lot of power. And you may disagree or agree with that where the power lies. But ultimately, it's kind of like the brilliance of the founding fathers to like set it up in a way that like it's very hard to like get too much of it. Like power corrupts absolutely, and they were pretty wise about that.
Knowing everything you know now, would you go and work there again if you had to redo it?
100%, I would. Yes. I mean, I just think that like it's just undeniable, and like it's just like I think if you look at it on a percentage basis of the goal, right, like 50 billion over, a trillion, right? It's like 5%. Like you may consider that a failure, but like I just look at it and like, what is my personal opportunity cost? Like, what are all the other things that I could do in my life that would generate that much value for the world, for veterans, right? Like now that, VA employees have a better mobile friendly chat GPT that they can use, like that's going to have some amount of impact. Like there's like tens of thousands of employees who use that every single day. There's like 7 or 8,000 creators on Gumroad who use Gumroad every day. So already in 55 days, I've built a product that more people use, and so the impact is certainly there. I do wish that like there was just a little bit more sort of a feeling of joining a movement. It felt a little bit like we were starting from day zero. I wouldn't want to go back and start from zero. I want to like continue where I left off, right? And I felt like there was a little bit, and I think this is just the nature of politics, I think, where it just feels like there's two sides, right? There's like the left and the right, and now it's the right's turn to try to have an impact. And it's like, well, actually it should be like a relay race, like we should, like everyone should try to align on certain goals. And when you lose, you have a peaceful transition of power and GitHub SSH keys and all these sorts of things. And you teach the next people, like, by the way, these are the projects that are going on. And I had to do a lot of that myself. Like I had to kind of just say, oh, I really think, and they're like, dude, we've been thinking about this for like 4 years. Here's like the memo we wrote. And I'm like, awesome. Like, why isn't this, there was no onboarding, right? There was no real like acclimation process to how this works. It was kind of just like figuring it out. And that's partly why I wrote the essays. I felt like I wanted sort of pre-reading, right? Like I wanted something that if you were joining the government or you're joining the VA or you're joining Doge, there's something you can read that will give you some context such that when you can hit the ground running, right? You have knowledge is power, right? And I felt like that would probably be my like one sort of operational critique of Doge is I think, and I'm sure there's stuff I don't know, so there's probably reasons for it that I'm not privy to. But I felt like we could have been a little bit more operationally sort of centralized and like build compounding knowledge, which all the people scattered throughout all the agencies would benefit from. And as part of that, just share it publicly, like, share what we're working on, share our code, like I've tried to do, and use that to like get more people involved, get our, feedback and ideas. And I think the government is huge and it's not scalable. It's like 1,000 different things you have to change to make it more efficient. Get public involved, get former employees involved, get old USDS people involved, get FANG engineers involved who are too busy and getting too well paid to move to DC and get paid nothing. But maybe they would contribute to an open source project or be interested in like the live stream, the Doge live stream or the Doge cast or whatever. I think that would be super valuable. I'm not really sure, to be honest, like why that didn't really happen. But I'm sure there was, maybe that was Trump saying, hey, you don't know, like you're not, like that's like, you got to balance your image with like
too far,
maybe too far. Yeah.
Last question for you is, are you changing anything in your investment portfolio, your life, your political views, anything after this experience? Like it's one thing to learn, but then I always think about like, how do you apply it or what does it change about the way that you operate both, kind of socially, politically, or on the investment front?
I mean, I just have a lot of faith in America. I think that's not changing. I think, I have a lot of faith. Like, I think, if I had not joined, I would have been much more short, sort of these like big federal government contractors. I'd be like, oh, you don't need any of them. We're going to in-house everything. I have never looked at like the stock prices of any of these companies. I like wasn't going to trade on anything. But having been there, I'm like, there's just like the US federal government is resilient to change. The federal government contractors are also resilient to change. Like they're going to adapt. There is like people think, oh, like OpenAI is going to destroy Google. It's like, well, Google is a high agency company, right? Like at an operate, like they will react. Their new AI mode is awesome. Like I think they're like, it's easy to underrate the old and overrate the new. I think it's easy to be like, oh, this new sexy thing is like so much better and faster and has no technical debt and has younger people who work hard. But there is a lot of value in like the institutional knowledge. There's a lot of things that just are not written down, that has like economic value, right? That has like gives you a competitive advantage as a business. And so I would not sell like Booz Allen Hamilton short, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, like all these federal government contractors that we don't really even think about in tech. They are tech companies, and they have money and they have brand and they have salespeople. They will do well. I think frankly, I think everyone will do well. Like I think the biggest learning I had was like, wow, like we're going to get all this stuff done. It might take 20 years, but like AI is happening and this stuff is going to get crazier and crazier. And the appetite and the competence of the average government employee is actually quite high. Like it's not like a bunch of people who like I would show up at the VA and like people would beat me on time. You know, people would be there at like 7:30 in the morning. And I'd be like, why are you here? And they're like, I just like my job. I just want it, you know, I want to be home a little earlier to hang out with the kids. So I want to like be here early. I'm like, I don't think you would like phone it in and then show up at 7:30 in the morning. Like people don't pretend to that level, right? Like people in startups show up at like 11 a.m. You know, like I was generally surprised. I think there is like a bias of tech people who are, frankly, in tech, it has been so lucrative. It has been so highly leveraged. The product market fit has been so extreme that there is a lot of waste and inefficiency in like Twitter pre-Elon, in Google and Facebook. Like there are a lot of idle resources there. And to be honest, like the government is more efficient than those companies. Like the government is more efficient than Google and Facebook because the government is constantly held accountable by the public, is constantly being whittled down by Congress. It's constantly being sued left and right. And it's actually like, you may argue does too much or should do things differently. But for the things it's meant to do, when you actually look at like the line items, like evaluating these contract line items, I was like, I was often impressed. I was like, wow, you actually like the government actually does this. Like, like it may look inefficient to hire like 30 people in the Philippines to do this thing, but that's cheaper than hiring like one Facebook software engineer, right? So like, often like when you like kind of dig into it, and I kind of got in trouble, I think, by Doge by saying like I was surprised by how efficient the government was. Not to say we shouldn't do anything, but just to say like this is good. We can like keep this going, right? It's a lot easier to like make it something move faster in the same direction it was already going in than like doing a U-turn, right? So I'm optimistic, and I think the Doge like playbook will be used by every administration, hopefully going forward, where it's like, okay, these are the kind of EOs, these are the tweaks that we would make. This is how we would scale it going forward. Maybe instead of 4 people at every agency, including 1 software engineer, we should have 40 people at every agency, including 10 software engineers, or I don't know. But I think the sort of the learnings will be super valuable. I think the value to America and the world of like running this Doge experiment is successful for sure.
I love to hear that. Where can we send people to find you on the internet or find out anything that you're working on?
Yeah, I would just check out my Twitter or my x.com/SHL is my handle. And I've pinned my Doge Days essay, so you can read a little bit about what I've been up to the last 55 days at Doge. And I'll probably, continue to share some random learnings and stuff over the next few months. I am on sort of paternity leave. Doge sort of helped me kickstart my paternity leave a little bit early. So I'm just sort of trying to like take a break a little bit and process, I guess, what's happened.
I love it. 55 days, new child in your life. 2025 is a big year for you. So I'm excited for you, and we'll definitely do this again in the future.
Thank you. Catch you later, man.